All right, great. Well, thanks for holding on. Thanks for joining us on this cold and rainy afternoon. It's feeling like early March again, right? Um, we have a slide deck for you. What we want to go over, I think there'll be some great improvements and updates to the program. As Dave mentioned, this is actually the second year of the NED program, or Neighborhood Economic Development Program, what used to be called ACBO. And so every year we kind of fine tune it and make some updates and improvements. So we want to give you an overview about those. First of all, we just want to welcome you, of course, but also then kind of go over the agenda just so you have a sense of what's coming up this afternoon and to try to answer questions that you might have. This won't be the only opportunity for interaction. We'll have some Q&A sessions coming up. So, if you have future questions and need some answers, we can provide them to you. So we wanted to give you an overview to explain, well, NED, what is that? What's the source of funding for that program? We'll go through that. We'll provide you an update as to the how the program has been revised this past year compared to last year. It's sort of been split into two sub-programs, mini programs. One we call the immediate impact program and the other capacity building. We'll go into those a little further. We'll go over the typical types of organizations that are eligible for funding as well as activities. The NED funding is it's not funding necessarily for all types of public services. It's sort of more narrowly focused on economic development. We'll go through the NED grant application a bit, and then we will talk about the application submission and timeline. So you have an update as to what's coming up and the timeline for the submission. And then we'll get into some questions and answers for you. And you're welcome to, I believe, post those as well. And you can also raise your hand at the end. So NED, what is it? Where does it come from, the funding? Well, the Neighborhood Economic Development Program is actually funded through community development block grant funds, right? These are the traditional CDBG funds that the city receives every year as an entitlement community or participating jurisdiction. So we get funds from HUD, roughly around $14 million per year for all the different activities. And so this is one component of that. Congress approves the amount of funding that the city receives, the level of CDBG funding. It's based on our population, poverty rate, and there's a whole slew of characteristics that they use to determine the level of funding. It's administered by HUD, so it's the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development funded program. Well, CDBG is. And this, as I mentioned, the city receives about $14 million in funds, roughly in the neighborhood of that amount. Most of the funds go towards affordable housing, economic development, and infrastructure projects. Those are sort of the bulk of it. But 500,000 of CDBG funds are set aside for the Neighborhood Economic Development Grant Program, or NED. So as was mentioned, the change this year is that there are two applications, and I'm going to actually turn it over to Josh to dive further into this.
Thank you, Whitney. Yes, so my name is Joshua Lawn. I am a planner with the city of Pittsburgh, and a lot of the organizations that receive funding, I'll be interacting with them through the contract process. So as you can see here, one of the key updates that is different if you're familiar with Neighborhood Economic Development, or NED, funding from previous years, is that there's a new sort of pool of funding, or a new pool of applicants that is available now, which is the capacity building program. The other one we're naming immediate impact. That's the other pool. That immediate impact pool is similar to just how NED had operated in 2020, and before that, ACBO, if you're familiar. So right here, I have two boxes that describe the different programs. So on the left, you can see it's just a snapshot to try to help you all understand the differences between these two different pools. On the left is regular NED, or the immediate impact. For that, well, okay, we're going to go into those a little bit more in a second, but the other difference that I want to highlight from here is that there's a difference in terms. So for the regular NED grant, it is a 1-year grant with a max of $40,000. And with the new capacity building NED grant, this is a maximum request of $50,000 grant, which is available $50,000 per year for 4 years. And the other main difference for the capacity building program is that this is aimed towards organizations that are smaller and relatively smaller in size. They have less staff in their organizations. Yeah, thanks. So first, we're going to dive into a little bit more on this immediate impact. So right here, this slide describes some of those details of what the NED program, the NED immediate or regular program is. This should seem familiar if you're familiar with NED from previous years. So the eligibility for organizations, or sort of this is aimed at any community development corporation, neighborhood groups doing economic development work in neighborhoods. As I mentioned before, these are, for the regular grant, these are 1-year awards that are up to $40,000. The scope for these projects should be focused on sort of local or neighborhood economic development. And they also work on these programs, according to HUD regulations, should be either a expansion of service or a defined project in economic development. Yes, if you want to continue to the next one, Dave.
Yeah, just to note, we've seen these used before for Main Street manager positions, real estate manager positions, executive leadership and CDCs, things like that. We've also seen it used for accessibility upgrades or first-time home purchases. They have kind of different qualifications when it comes to income eligibility, but this money's been used that way as well.
Yes. So now the slide is talking about the next slide is about the capacity building program. So this again is the new program that that's new to NED. So for this grant or this pool of the grant, applicants must expend in a year less than $200,000 in salary and benefits. So that's sort of the eligibility for people accessing specifically the capacity building side. The term for this, the grant for this the maximum request for this grant is $50,000 per year. And again, this is for a 4-year window. Even though organizations receive sort of this 4-year commitment if they've been accepted into the capacity building program, they still must apply sort of every year and sort of be meeting the invoicing requirements that we'll be setting up. Also, awardees for the capacity building grant must meet with our office, city staff, quarterly for technical assistance programs. All of this is supposed to, continue to help build capacity, different technical assistance programming that will help organizations think about hiring and other just important pieces that the city will need to reimburse expenses. So for this grant, we're we're envisioning, since nobody has actually received this yet, we're envisioning that this will apply towards staff positions, so paying personnel. This could be full-time staff, an executive director. This could be some sort of administrative or fiscal position, or a real estate manager. So now we're talking about the organization eligibility. So how do you know if your organization is eligible for this funding? Applicants must be a applicants must be a 501c3 nonprofit. There are situations where we allow fiscal sponsorship arrangements, but you need to contact our office ahead of time by emailing us at community.development@pittsburghpa.gov. We'll be mentioning that email in the future too, because that's basically how you reach out for questions. Along with being a 501c3 nonprofit, you must serve a CDBG eligible census tract in the city of Pittsburgh. So basically what that means is, as Whitney had mentioned, sort of there are regulations from the federal government on what neighborhoods or census tracts are eligible to receive this funding. So what we've created on our website is a map of all of the census tracts that are eligible for this funding. And basically what that means is your census tract has at least 51% of the residents in a census tract, 51% of them at least make low to moderate income. We can email that. That link is available on our website where the application is, but we can also email that out to anybody if they would need a link to that. The other requirement is that the organization is engaging in or facilitating some sort of community economic development. Like Dave was saying, oftentimes these are projects that are focused in residential or sort of housing improvement, development, reducing vacancy, repairing vacant houses for resale. It could also focus on the business district, looking at bringing in small businesses, filling in vacancies maybe in a business district or a main street, and those kinds of activities. The last requirement that we have here is actually, and I'm just going to say one more time, only for the capacity building grant, which is that annually your organization spends less than $200,000 on staff salary and benefits. Dave, if you want to go to the next, yes. So right here is a slide that talks about all of the different eligible projects that we have listed in our application. So it's a wide range of topics: neighborhood planning that leads to the selection of development sites, creating community consensus around a project, marketing of new developments, tenant selection, information resource, business recruitment, financial planning, project management, as in like a development project. So examples are architect or contractor selection, construction management. Administrative control of a development project is another type of project that's eligible. And then the final one is greening activities in the facilitation of residential and or commercial development as delineated in a community plan to eliminate blight. And so those are the kind of projects that that are available for both of those two different pools that we talked about. So assuming that, so this slide here is talking about assuming that your organization has been awarded funding. There are some things that we want to make sure you all understand. The grants must be spent within a year. So typically that program year to spend down the grant runs from July 1st, 2021, or obviously it'll be for 2021 through to June 30th, 2022. This is a reimbursement grant. So the grantees must pay for these programs and then submit to the city documentation showing that those funds have been spent before we can reimburse your organization for those funds. Depending on what type of activity you're spending or what type of expenses you are applying your grant towards, the city will require different types of documentation for reimbursement. So that could be receipts if it's sort of a direct purchase of an item, or it could be payroll records and timesheets if it's personnel. Once that documentation has been submitted, the city will send the check to the grantee for the amount requested. Typically, that's done on a monthly basis, and this is it takes about 30 days for that process to turn around once you've submitted that that request for reimbursement. And then in this next slide, is just sort of a quick example of what that might look like, specifically for personnel. Since most organizations receive request NED funding for personnel expenses, we're just doing a quick example for that scenario. So if your nonprofit has been notified that you are awarded $40,000 for personnel costs, basically you will go through the process of signing an agreement with the city. Every awardee has to go through this process. After that agreement has been signed, you would need to submit timesheets showing the hours applied towards the grant. Basically, the timesheets of the employee that is being paid through the grant. That timesheet needs to show the hours and be signed by the employee and the supervisor. And then along with that timesheet, we would also need a payroll or pay stub, basically just confirming the amount that you're requesting. Yeah, and I think I'm sending it over to Dave now to explain a little bit more about the application process.
Where I can.
Yeah, go for it, Whitney.
Okay. We're available, as you can see. Okay, so we're going to dive into the application itself. The first thing is just to note that there are two, if you've gone on the website, and if you've looked, there are two applications currently available. One's for public services. These are sort of the more traditional, what used to be called ULO grants, now public services. That opened last Friday, April 9th. The NED program opened, the application opened on April 5th. So anyway, just be sure you're completing the correct application when you go onto the website. It should does clearly lay that out, I think, but just to make sure. For the Neighborhood Economic Development Program, you're going to download a PDF of the application. It's a fillable PDF, and you'll complete it. There have been some updates and improvements based on some comments from last year. More ability to provide more text and so on, but anyway, some improvements and updates. You can use just the one NED application for both programs, okay, the capacity building and immediate impact. So there aren't two applications for the NED overall application. It's just to use the one. And as was mentioned, if your organization is below the $200,000 cap, what you want to do is in section 3B, again, if you'll see it in the application, to be considered for both. You can be considered for both capacity building and immediate impact. So it's not, oh, I can only pick one or the other. I mean, depending on, if your staffing costs and benefits is below 200,000 or above 200,000, it's going to be just the one pool. But just to be clear that we don't have two applications for the net, it's one application. Also, we do prefer that everyone submit the application electronically. We've tried to make it as easy as possible, and everyone did a great job last year. We do make some allowances for paper applications. They're available upon request, but to be honest, those are just a little more involved for us to process. We're just trying to be efficient and help everyone out there. So we prefer applications to be submitted digitally, but we wanted that as an option. So as was mentioned, what you do is you will go to this website. As you can see, it's the Grant Opportunities website on our website, the link there, to download the application. You'll download it and complete it. And then, as you can see here, you'll create a zip compressed folder, right, containing the application and the attachments. And you'll label that with your organization's name. And that allows us, of course, to make sure that we get all the great submissions that we anticipate you're going to provide to us. And so we can make sure we get those applications and we can quickly process them. And then you'll email that complete application attachments to our email address, community.development@pittsburghpa.gov. That's the email address we're trying to promote as much as possible to let people know, to keep in touch with us. And Josh also made a note, there are specific instructions for creating compressed folders in Microsoft and Mac. So if you need assistance with that, those links are there for those who've never done that before. For attachments, we've also tried to make the number of attachments a little more manageable than last year. So what we're asking for now is your most recently submitted IRS 990 form. We know there are different kinds of 990s. There's 990N, and anyway, every year nonprofits have to submit a 990 to the IRS, either the simpler one or more complicated. But our expectation is that you'll submit to us the most recent form version of that. As well, we'll need your organization's current annual budget, and that's because this will help us to determine, which NED program makes the most sense, and to just make sure, we're kind of processing things properly. And it should be the organization's complete operating budget, right? Not just the budget for your specific project or activity, but the whole organization. So next, we're going to go through the timeline. Obviously, as I mentioned, the application opened on April 5th. Today's the virtual information session. Again, welcome. And we do have a couple of Q&A sessions we're trying out this year. It's not something we did last year, but we thought it might be a good opportunity to allow people to ask us questions virtually. So we have a couple of sessions coming up on every Friday, well, April 23rd and April 30th, from 3 to 4 p.m. These are kind of open house sessions. If you go to the Grant Opportunities page, you can register there for the Zoom link. You have to register for each one. You can attend one or the other or both. It's up to you. And it's a much more open Q&A session. You might say, well, hey, I have a question about section 2, and I'm not sure how to answer that, or whatever it might be. So the overall application deadline is Friday, May 14th. So you have over a month, about a month to submit your application. That's the deadline. We anticipate, we'd like to say 5 p.m. on May 14th. That's the deadline. And And then just to give you a preview of what's coming up next, you say, well, what happens after that? Well, there's a NED committee made up of city council staff and members and economic development professionals, and they'll look through the applications and we'll look through them, make sure they qualify based on the criteria that's been outlined. And then our hope is that in June, the approved applicants will be invited to make a presentation to the NED Advisory Committee, again, probably in June, during working hours. And that worked well last year, and that's what we anticipate will happen again this year. And then we hope, that by July, we then get through the process of getting the funding approved by City Council, and then so we're ready to go by early fall. So at this point, I know you all have lots of questions. We'll try to provide some answers. I do want to say, first of all, that we may not have all the answers right now for some of your questions. We'll try to provide them, but if we don't, we'll definitely get back to you. We're going to compile these questions and answers and then post them on our website. We did that last year, and we're going to do that again this year so that other people may have the same kinds of questions. Maybe they're too shy to ask, I don't know. But we'll try to have those posted because there are probably some similar questions that people have. And then again, we're always open to you having you email us at community.development@pittsburghpa.gov. The other thing I want to make sure that you know is that these slides will be posted on our website, future reference. If at some point you say, well, I wonder what they said about this or that, you can refer back to this presentation. This is also being recorded, as was mentioned earlier, so a recording of it will be available. So you have lots of opportunity to view this in the future if you'd like.